My name is Livingston White, and I'll be hosting the seminar this afternoon. I want to acknowledge the presence of colleagues, Dr. Alpha Obika. I see Dr. Gordon Bell as well, and then other MPhil candidates in the room, Tashia Young, and we have our PhD students, Kingsley Roberts and Yvonne Grinham Nicholson as well. I also see Mr. McLaren, always grateful for your support, Mr. McLaren, and of course the team, Javon. Javon is online as well, and Craig. So thanks for joining us as we guide Miss McKie today in her first presentation. Quite a bold step, Miss McKie, to be volunteering to do the presentation first. What we expect to happen is that you'll present your plans for your research. It's good to be early in proposing these plans so you can get on with your improvements and revisions and get your ethical approval so you can get to data collection. So congratulations on making the effort to present this early in the semester. So after you present, we would then hear feedback. We would take questions and comments from the audience, and persons may join us as we are going through, but we'll allow you to go through with your presentation. And so right now, let me invite Abigail Whittingham. Ms. Whittingham, are you there?
Yes, sir, I'm here.
Production. Okay, great. Take it away.
Good afternoon, everyone. Miss Cedella McKie is a first-year MPhil student at CARIMAC pursuing a degree in communication studies. Her specific interest lies in researching corporate social responsibility. She also recently concluded her first degree in integrated marketing communication at the school. Ms. McKie describes herself as a media practitioner, having been engaged at Lissame Caribbean Limited in marketing ideation and market research, extreme editor, as graphic designer, social media manager, and part-time producer at the Edutainment 101 on Route 96 FM, and FET Essentials and Laris Production as a social media manager. Ladies and gentlemen, help me welcome Miss Cedella McKie.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much, Abigail, for that warm introduction, and Dr. White for those interesting and very heartwarming opening sentiments. I do apologize for not being on camera, however, my connection is not the strongest, and I wouldn't necessarily want to impact the presentation, but I will go ahead and proceed. And I must say to the guests, welcome to the first of what is expected to be a very exciting, thought-provoking series of seminars. And so I'm very excited to be one of many, right? So in terms of the focus for my presentation for this afternoon, it would be, as Abigail and Dr. White would have mentioned, corporate social responsibility, specifically the impact of corporate social responsibility on customers' perceptions, behaviors, and loyalty, and the scope of the research, focusing specifically on Jamaican banking sector, right? And in terms of bringing you through the proposed research, the agenda for this afternoon would be to contextualize my research, the background of it, then going so into the purpose and significance, not only as an academic study, but also the impact that it's expected to have. We then proceed into the necessary theories involved or can be associated with the research, the literature review, the expected methodology in carrying out the research, and finally, the possible limitations to the research. Now, in going into the background of the research, I think one of the essential things to do first and foremost is to define corporate social responsibility. So it is in essence a management concept whereby companies integrate social and environmental concerns in their business operations and interactions with their stakeholders. So it's generally understood as a way through which a company achieves a balance of economic, environmental, and social imperatives, which can be classified as a triple bottom line approach. And so in further expounding on the concept itself, it can be broken down into three types. There is environmental CSR, corporate social responsibility, which is primarily focused on offsetting negative environmental impacts. There's also the ethical aspect of it, which is focused on embracing ethical responsibilities and values and attitudes. There is also the philanthropic aspect, which, as I think most of you can assume, is linked to charity and nonprofit initiatives. And there is finally the fourth, economic CSR, which is focused on making profits and contributing to the economy. And as it relates to these four types, compiled some of the issues that you may realize that come up as it relates to CSR involve environmental management, eco-efficiency, responsible sourcing of raw materials, stakeholder engagement, labor standards and working conditions, social equity, gender balance, and anti-corruption measures. So in terms of a breakdown of the concept itself, this chart gives a pretty clear view, I would say, of the different aspects of CSR. And so as it relates specific to my research topic, the impact on customer perception, behaviors, and loyalty within the banking sector, the purpose of my research, first and foremost would be to understand the mind of the customer in terms of what their expectations are of the banking industry, if they do have particular expectations, and if they are applicable, if those expectations are being met. Secondly, purpose of the study would be to have a greater understanding, perhaps an appreciation for the value of corporate social responsibility, especially as it relates to the overflow into the sustainable development goals. And then in terms of the problem that this research is expected to contribute to solving is the fact that there is currently insufficient research, especially in the region, as it relates to the impact of corporate social responsibility and generally how different stakeholders interact with the concept, understand the concept, etc. So that's some context for the research. And as we further break down conceptual framework, I would go into defining the main terms associated with my research topic. So corporate social responsibility, CSR for short, is, as I would have said, a management concept of integrating social and environmental concerns in business operations and interactions with stakeholders, through which a company aims to achieve a balance of economic, environmental, and social imperatives. Now, a second concept that's very prominent in my research topic is the customer. Now, as it relates specifically to my research, this definition would be an individual or business who is the primary signatory on a registered bank account, and the selected banks, based on the selection criteria, would have been the Jamaica Bank of Nova Scotia, the National Commercial Bank, and the Jamaica National Building Society. And in terms of selection criteria as well, the participant would have to been a customer at the bank for at least 1 year. as it relates to customer perception and how we define that. That would include the way customers select, organize, and interpret both information and stimuli related to a brand, its products and services, which in turn determines what they think and how they feel about them, right? And two final terms used in my research would be customer behavior and customer loyalty. As it relates to behavior, what that would be is a study of how individual customers, groups, or organizations select, buy, use, and dispose of ideas, goods, and services to satisfy their needs and wants. And then as it relates to customer loyalty, that may be defined as a customer's faithfulness and commitment to a business. So it's a measure of the loyalty based on their preferences, their degree of satisfaction, the frequency of purchase, fidelity, price sensitivity, and brand advocacy, right? So that would encompass the context for the research as well as a conceptual framework. Now, as we further expound into the theoretical framework, a theory that may be associated or expounded on within this research is the reciprocal theory, which in essence shows that various factors influence the behavior of individuals. So these factors may include social environment as well as the individual and their personal traits. So expounding a bit more into what this theory is and how it is relevant to this research is specifically related to a pocket of the theory, which is reciprocal determinism, which in itself is a central concept of Albert Bandura's social learning theory. And what it is a model composed of three factors that influence behavior. One, the individual, inclusive of how the individual thinks and feels. Two, their environment. And three, the behavior itself. So according to Bandura, not only does the environment influence a person's thinking, but their subsequent behavior influences their environment. So that speaks to the very essence of reciprocity, as the individual having an impact on their environment, but also the environment having an impact on them as well, right? And this is just a visual representation of that triangular effect. But before we do move on from the theoretical framework, the breakdown of the factors, I'd want to shed a bit more light into these three core factors of the framework, which is the personal, the behavioral, and the environmental. So in terms of the behavioral factors and what that is within the reciprocal determinism theory, it is a person's behavior is influenced through cognitive processes and environmental factors, such as social stimuli. And an example of that would have been, for example, a child is acting out because, for example, they do not feel too interested in school, and the results of that being that the teacher would reprimand the child. The effect of that and the reciprocal effect would be possibly the child acting out even more. So here behavior may be defined as anything you do that may be rewarded or punished. Now, as it relates to the environmental factors, this component refers to the context in which the behavior occurs. So more than a person's physical environment, it also includes a social environment as well. So specifically what people are present, whether people are present or absent, and the attitudes, beliefs, and ideas that these people hold. And so specifically as it relates to this research is to expound a bit more into understanding those attitudes as well. And so the example here would be if a teacher does, for example, yell at a child, the environmental factor would be that all parties within that space may be affected. So not only the child who is yelled at, but the other classmates within that environment, as well as the teacher herself who is being the causative action, right? And so finally, the personal factor, to expound a bit more on it, would be the individual component, which includes the characteristics that would have been rewarded in the past. So what that means is personal traits that the individual would have shown. So their personality, cognitive factors that play an important role into how a person behaves, what traits they tend to retain or not, their expectations, their beliefs, and their unique personality characteristics. And so that would be a breakdown of the theoretical framework. And so in proceeding, as it relates to my research specifically, I would go into the research questions as well as the methodology and literature review, right? So in terms of the focus for this research, the questions posed linked back to the main topic of the impact of CSR on customer perceptions, behaviors, and loyalty would be what are the types and extents of CSR as it relates to selected banks? What are the customers' perceptions, behavior, and loyalty sentiments generally towards the selected banks? What do customers understand and consider as it relates to corporate social responsibility? To what extent does greater or different CSR efforts correlate to a greater or distinct customer awareness of CSR efforts? To what extent is there greater or distinct CSR efforts? Sorry, let me repeat that. To what extent is greater or distinct CSR efforts correlated to positive customer perception, behavior, and loyalty? And finally, is customer age and banking level, both at the retail or business level, a moderating variable within the impact of CSR? So in terms of standardizing the information into pockets, this would be the breakdown, right? And so in terms of analyzing previous literature as it relates to corporate social responsibility, majority of that literature being outside of the region, there would have been different findings, primarily broken down into how CSR generally is conceptualized, how customers perceive the concept of corporate social responsibility, what are the factors that primarily influence customer perceptions, behaviors, and loyalty within the banking sector specifically, the impact of corporate social responsibility on customer perceptions, behavior, and loyalty within the banking sector again, and lastly, demographics as a moderating variable. So in terms of research that would have been conducted previously as it relates to the concept of corporate social responsibility, the term itself would have emerged around the 1960s, and at that time what it would have represented is a company's consciousness of their impacts on society. However, as you know, time went by and the term itself would have evolved, expanded somewhat. And so at present, it may be pinpointed by a four-part framework of economic, legal, ethical, and the discretionary expectations that society has of organizations at a given point in time, right? And so as it relates to this research specifically, it's to expound on, as I would have said, if those expectations exist locally in Jamaica, as well as the nature of these expectations, if so. Now, as it relates to the second point of the literature review, which is consumers' perceptions of corporate social responsibility. Over the years, as time went by, and the concept grew, there has been an increased number of research studies done on corporate social responsibility. And so in assessing CSR as it relates to the image of the company, findings show where the coherence, motivational attribution, and credibility play a significant role in how persons view a company and view their CSR efforts. So in that, a customer's perception of CSR motivation, whether it is genuine or egoistic, influence their conception of credibility. So even in present day where you might see different companies having different engagements, there for some will be the thought of whether it is genuine or just a show, right? So as it relates to research conducted on customers' perceptions, it is found that credibility is a consideration had, as well as study found that demographic characteristics of gender, age, and educational level don't prove relevant as moderators currently. However, in capturing similar data as it relates to customers' values of CSR, it is found that they are particularly interested in additional factors of price, quality, company attitude, as well as their personal loyalty. So in the research conducted previously in those studies, the results show that CSR is not necessarily isolated in how customers relate to it, but more so linked to other variables. Now, as it relates to the third point within the literature review, the factors that primarily influence customer perceptions, behaviors, and loyalty in the banking sector. Studies have explored the concepts of customer satisfaction, service quality, trust, perceived value, perceived enjoyment, and technology. Now, in a particular research by Alma Mari and Abdul Rab in 2017, the reciprocal theory was highlighted as a basis where loyalty is considered the kind behavior that results in trust, and switching to another service provider, quote unquote, unkind behavior results from a breakdown in trust. So ultimately, the findings suggest that the factors mentioned should be capitalized on in retaining current customers, though not specifically how to implement each practically, right? So as it relates to factors that influence customer perception, as I said, it's not a case where CSR is isolated, but consumers' history with the brand, their overall attitude towards the brand should be taken into consideration. Now, as it relates to the point of impact of corporate social responsibility on customers' perceptions, behaviors, and loyalty within the banking sector, several research efforts have actually studied the impact on the customer, testing the potential influences as it relates to loyalty, satisfaction, value perception, attitude, and so on. Now, the results of those findings show where behaviors such as recommending a bank to others was more likely for customers of both savings and commercial banks, where they had positive perceptions of the bank's CSR, whereas repurchasing behavior are only triggered by customer satisfaction. While another study by Iqbal and Pramanik, 2016, breaks down the nature of CSR impact to show where the more prioritized CSR investment on customer-centric philanthropic, green environment, and ethical initiatives are have greater influence on positive perception about the organization. So to sum that up, what it is saying is that the different CSR efforts conducted by these banks, the context of these studies, India, the CSR efforts conducted by these banks in India do have a positive correlation as it relates to not only how a customer perceives the bank, but also how they interact with it, right? And in proceeding to the final point of study, of the literature review, demographics as a moderating variable. In assessing the role of demographical information on customers, such as age, as a moderating factor between CSR and consumer perception, behavior, and loyalty, research results did vary. So within the telecommunication sector across Europe and Asia, a 2017 study by Masusu indicated where there is no significant difference between men and women, nor low and high educational groups. However, there was a significant mean difference in what concerns some perceptual CSR dimensions, as well as corporate brand loyalty between younger and older citizens, and respectively between those residing in smaller cities and those from larger ones. So here, whereas gender did not pose a difference in how persons perceive and regard corporate social responsibility, there was somewhat of a difference as it relates to the area that they lived in, whether urban or rural, as well as age difference, right? And in a latter method, a study did incorporate the Likert scale, which allowed for statistical coding of similar data, which revealed that citizens in Romania did not necessarily have a difference, whether it be age, gender, localization. There was not necessarily found a difference in how different persons within that country, Romania, perceived CSR. All right. And that would have been some background in terms of previous research done surrounding the matter of corporate social responsibility. But as you would have noted, most of them, or all of them, were outside of the region. All right. Now, in terms of carrying out the research, the sample will be Jamaican banking customers, specifically of the Bank of Nova Scotia, the National Commercial Bank, and the Jamaica National Building Society between the ages of 18 and 60. And the sample will be distinguished by personal and business accounts. As it relates to collecting, the process of collecting the data, carrying out the research itself, mixed method approach will be taken. So it will commence with content analysis of the bank's current CSR efforts. So what that will include is a review of not only current literature as it relates to corporate social responsibility of the three named banks and their online content, such as website content, press releases, actual initiative footage, and so forth. Where was I? Right, so that would capture the current state of corporate social responsibility as it relates to those banks. So that would be the aspect of content analysis. And then following from that, a pilot survey will be done to measure the internal reliability and consistency of the research. Now, what this will utilize is an analysis of preliminary research. So the question sheets, the surveys, and the interview questions would be quite similar to that actually be conducted within the study to ensure that there is accuracy in the analysis, there is a fortification of method being used, the tools being used to ensure that there is a meeting, of course, of ethical standards and of optimal capturing of data, right? Now, in terms of administering the actual research, which would be inclusive of interviews and questionnaires, branch locations will be selected throughout the island, where there will be an approximate total aim of reaching about 450 customers, 150 per bank of the three. And this number would be, of course, dispersed across different branches with the expectation to increase the extent to which the results can be generalized. Now, participants would be relatively made aware of course, participants will be made aware of the ethical guidelines of informed consent, anonymity within the research, ability to withdraw, and so on. The pilot survey, however, would especially test and maneuver the manner in which interviews may most effectively occur. So after the data is collected for open-ended questions, especially those of interviews, the responses will be analyzed and coded into suitable categories based on similarities between concepts. So the results ultimately would be presented in a tabular format for a comparative review. That would involve the breakdown of the process of the research, the basic methodology in carrying it out. Now, as we go towards a close, the limitations, and I'm pretty sure as I delve further into building out this research, fortifying different aspects of it, much more limitations would come up. But currently, one would be that the study may not be able to be generalized to other industries, given that the focus is on the banking sector. However, all in all, I do want to thank you for listening, and I look forward to your feedback.
Thank you, Cedella, for that presentation. So at this point now, I'll invite any questions or comments for Cedella McKie. And while you put together your comments, I just want to acknowledge the presence of others who joined during the presentation. Welcome to other MPhil students. I see Reina, Kimiko, and Richardo in the room now. Very good. And Brittany is here as well. Brittany has a comment. Can you go back to the first slide with the topic, please? That's Cedella. Could you just go back?
Let me see if I can present.
Brittany, do you have a question or comment? That would be the slide, right? Brittany, did you have a comment or question related to that first slide? Okay, I'm not hearing from Brittany. Well, I hope going back to that first slide helped. Dr. Obika, go ahead.
Hi, thank you very much, Cedella, for detailed presentation. I'm getting a sense of where the research is going to take you. And I like the fact that you've been brave to step up and present the ideas while they are still being formed. I don't know if I missed it because I stepped away for a little, but did you finalize your research questions?
Yes, indeed. I can go back to that slide.
Yes, thank you. I just want to get a sense of what specifically, okay, what are the types? All right, thank you. If you can just keep this slide here for a bit to read them.
Sure, definitely. And thank you for those sentiments, Dr. Obika.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Well, you know, while you have this slide up and while persons are reading your questions, could you describe or, you know, outline for me how these questions relate to the methodology? So the choice of methods that you're using.
Right, for both qualitative and quantitative?
Yes.
Right. So while some of the questions such as, let me see if I can move this here section, right. Some of the questions are more so to get contextual ideas of, or get a contextual grasp of basic perceptions that persons have that can be categorized, into different pockets. Whereas as you get into the questions down below, such as to what extent is there greater or distinct CSR efforts, do greater or distinct CSR efforts correlate to positive customer perception? Those I feel would take or require more insight via interviews. So I don't think that would necessarily be able to be captured by just a questionnaire. So I think that some questions more so related specifically to the psychographic aspects of perception, behavior, and loyalty would require more qualitative insight, while some questions as it relates to the types of CSR that persons try and understand can be captured with more quantitative research methods.
Okay. You did say that you're doing mixed method research, right? Exactly. Have you thought about how the mixing will occur?
In terms of
The two methods.
not
so you mixed methods, yeah.
right. Not necessarily in depth in terms of building that out. The current course that I am actually doing with you has, helped in terms of proceeding into building that out. But currently, how that would work is a case where I would say some days would be slotted, or a period of time would be slotted where the preliminary research to grasp ideas of customer consideration of a CSR, that kind of information via questionnaires would be collected first, and then the more qualitative, the more insightful information would be collated afterwards.
Okay. There may be opportunities for mixing, but you could also keep the different methods separate. Okay. So that's something to consider, the level of mixing that you're doing, and if it is necessary for these types of questions that you're asking. Okay. I see some comments in the chat. Cedella, are you able to see the chat?
No, I think I can pull it up. Give me a second.
Mel Sutherland is saying interesting research, given that Jamaica's customer services are arguably poor. Our customer service needs more work, to be honest. Grateful for this point of view. And then Dr. Obika is saying, I'm interested in the motivation for the study. Why CSR and why focus on banks?
All right. Thank you for that sentiment, Shamil, and thank you for that question, Dr. Obika. In terms of the motivation for CSR, for me personally, is a case where, as I would say, as society goes more so towards, or there is overarching consideration for profit and increasing capitalism, I do find it very interesting for companies that still genuinely interwork CSR into the principles of their company, into how they operate and see the value in it. So for me, that's something I'd want to explore, not only as it relates to the concepts of it and how those companies who genuinely maintain that kind of CSR effort, how it is that different stakeholders relate to them, but how they execute and maintain that kind of altruism. And I think the second part of your question was why banks? The banking industry, I would say, is one of the standardized ones in Jamaica. And I'd want to, in reviewing criteria, I had wanted to ensure that there is a level of, what I would say, there is not necessarily too much of my opinion going into the selection. So even in selecting the banks, there was a particular criteria where it would be the top 3 banks as it relates to the branches island-wide. So the banks selected were actually those whose number added up to an average of 2 branches per parish. So it's, in terms of selecting the banking industry, that was not necessarily linked to personal motivation, I would say, but more so in an effort to standardize the study.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? In your methodology, in your method, you were describing that you would be going to the banks themselves to contact contact the customers. Do you foresee any issues there?
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Dr. Beaker. Right, thank you for that question, Dr. White. Given the current, as you know, the current state of the world, and as that, how that correlates with when the study is actually being carried out, there's likely to be some issues as it relates to physically going into the banks, getting that kind of response, especially with, I would say, the growth of digital in this season of the world. Yeah, there is some perceived issues there.
Okay, because the target sample size you have of 450. I was just wondering how you would meet that sample size, and even get the endorsement of the banks, allowing you to solicit information from their customers. So it's almost as if you would be outside the bank, right? And then need to get some information from them. Okay. So this is something you'd have to think about, because I don't know if you need to be in and around the banks. I can understand that it's probably more efficient, but I don't know if other people feel like, the banks, you'd have to get some sort of permission from the banks to be able to do this,
right,
serve in and around their environs. And I don't know if based on what you're studying, they may be quite curious about the results of it. So you'd have to get some buy-in from the banking sector to support the study, is what I'm saying. And in the absence of that, do you have a backup plan to still reach your target sample size with or without the support of the banking sector?
Right, valid point there. In terms of a backup, the other alternative would be within the digital space, I would say. Distributing the questionnaire virtually, allowing persons to, respond. But the issue with that aspect would be in, I would say, maintaining the, what's it called? The equity of the results. So in terms of the certain amount responding from that bank, maintaining the equity per section to ensure that it can be generalized. So what I would want to avoid in carrying out the research is a majority of respondents being from one specific demographic as it relates to where the bank with. But valid point, I have noted it in terms of maneuvering for that. So thank you.
I listened to your review of the literature, and one of the things I think you'll need to work on is just to help us to see how you're moving from what some of the comments you were sharing to these questions that you have up on the slide right now. Okay.
Okay.
And so it's, for me, the justification of why Dr. Obiko was already asking why you chose the banking sector, and I see Shamel Sutherland making a comment about why it would be necessary to do a study like this. One of the things in research is that we're always challenging ourselves to say, are these the right set of questions to be asking at this point in time? Okay. Just thinking from personal experience, and I could be wrong, but I'm just going to hear your take on it. I would like to argue that many banking customers are probably distracted by so many other issues about the bank and the service. Like the typical Jamaican is just worried that, we're watching our bank account to make sure that the scammers won't steal our money or steal our credit card information and your debit cards. And, we're just watching the banking fees and hoping that the bank doesn't charge me for something else and hide it somewhere and I can't see the hidden fees and so on. And so I'm asking then, is a typical customer so interested in the corporate social responsibility efforts of a bank, right? Like, I'm a member of banks, we're all members of different banks, and do we pay attention to that? And am I loyal to the bank because of it? When I think of my banking experience, it was just out of convenience. You open a bank account because your employer tell you that they're sending your salary to a bank account, so you needed to get a bank account. And many people would open something that's close to where they work, on the route home, in their neighborhood, and so on. And I don't know that somebody goes out of their way to say, wow, I am going to become a member of that bank because of their great corporate social responsibility. And maybe that is what you're trying to test, because the literature is suggesting that there is some relationship going on there, right? Between the customer loyalty and so on. So like right now, if you were to ask me about my bank's corporate social responsibility, like, they do that? I just know that they have foundations. So each bank has a foundation. And so what I'm trying to get you to work through is, maybe you found studies in other jurisdictions on this topic. It's to now bring it to Jamaica and apply it in Jamaica in a way that is realistic to that is related and relevant to the Jamaican experience, if you see what I'm saying.
Yes.
Who do you control for half your respondents telling you, boy, I don't know about the corporate social responsibility. Me concerned about how them charge so much fees and why me can't get this and why they charge me this money and why the scammer them thief for money, So it's like for us, and then that fear, and the issue about a lot of Jamaicans don't have bank accounts. So the whole idea of people going into the digital economy, using cards to pay for things instead of actual cash. So it's like we're a society that is moving towards it. And I think these questions are questions that are being asked before their time, so there's a little bit of visionary in you that says that these issues will probably become a little bit more relevant as a greater portion of our societies get involved in banking behavior. You understand? And so for me, I would say to you, in a very early stage in your study, establish that it is an issue up front, is what I'm getting at. Establish that for the banks themselves, they see where their corporate social responsibility helps them to be perceived as a better bank, or to enhance the loyalty of their customers, to influence the behaviors of their customers. So what I'm trying to get at, I know Alpha asked this question, but I'm putting a different spin on it to say, is this an issue for the banks? If you get what I'm saying.
Right.
Where's Cedella, McKie, the outsider, coming in with this topic? And how do you go against somebody that said to you about, yeah, we don't link our corporate social responsibility to banking like that. In fact, there's a bank and then there's a foundation, two separate entities, and we don't try to use a foundation to increase customers and bank accounts in the banking. You get my point?
Right.
That's where I'm going, because I get the sense then that, when you see some of the campaigns that the banks run, they're clearly running those campaigns to increase sales of their loan instruments and their different, monetary services that they have. But I don't know that they go out deliberately trying to use the work of their foundations to then bring that over into their commercial services. So corporate social responsibility and commercial services. You get my point?
Right. Very valid point.
The perception, the behavior, and the loyalty sentiments that you're talking about is more towards the commercial activities of the bank, I would think. We're using the services of the bank. And I could engage with that particular service without knowing anything about the foundation or the corporate social responsibility. And so I wanted you just to be, to establish that the banks themselves see a link, and possibly some customers do see a link as well. And yes, there is scope for some research in this area. All right.
Mm-hmm.
Just throw that out there. Okay.
Yes, thank you for that, Dr. White. And in terms of that being the focal point, I wouldn't say it's hard and fast. I believe that there are other ways to standardize a study, but I think you made a very relevant point in terms of, the cultural context and ensuring that it is, relevant in terms of how customers think here in Jamaica. So thank you for that.
I know the banks themselves think about their own structures and the foundation separate from the commercial arm and that sort of a thing, even the workers themselves may not even think like that, workers will tell you that we work for the bank, the commercial side of the bank. That's foundation, but over there, that's where they give the scholarships and give back the money to society and all of that stuff. All right. So that's something to explore, I would say. Any other comments or questions? Do you have any questions for us? Was there anything for you, Cedella, that you needed feedback on, that you were wondering? Oh, I see Yvonne coming in. Let's allow Yvonne to speak.
Yeah,
Yvonne.
I just had a quick question. In terms of the customers, you have, are you looking at business customers versus the ordinary customers like, us here? Because the banks have corporate customers and they might be more influenced by CSR rather than the ordinary person walking in.
Right.
I'm wondering if you contemplated, dividing it into corporate customers and their perception versus the ordinary customers.
Right, thank you for that question, Yvonne. Yes, that was the intention. So even looking at the final question, it was to make that distinction between the normal personal banking or retail customer or the commercial or business banking customer. So that in terms of intention, that distinction would have been made as well.
So when you're doing your questionnaire, are you going to do it differently for corporate customers? Or is it just going to be one questionnaire for both corporate and retail?
I would say in terms of expounding on or exploring more so the nature and characteristics of each group, there might be some relevance in distinguishing the questionnaires to make it very applicable to each group. But in terms of foreseeing it for now, I would not be able to confirm.
Right, because some of the questions for retail might not be relevant to the corporate customer.
Right. Agreed.
Okay. Thank you for that question, Yvonne. Yes, Cedella. So do you have any final questions or comments for us? I was just asking you if there was any issue you needed feedback on that you were not so confident about and wanted to hear what we thought about it and so on.
Right.
So do you have any questions for us?
Yes. So one aspect I'm trying to skip back to that slide, but one aspect I don't feel I fully understood or explored was the theoretical framework. So is it a case where it is utilizing multiple theories and using those to interrogate your research, or more so focusing on one and linking it to your research in terms of the processes of it and the theoretical background?
Well, let me say this. It could be both. It could be a single theoretic frame that you're using, or you could you could create what we call a conceptual model or framework and borrow from several. Okay. So as you continue to do the literature review, you may come away with a range of theories that help to explain consumer behavior. All right.
Okay.
And as you look at those that explain consumer behavior, you may be able to pull aspects from each of those. All right. So right now you were looking at just that one, right? You had the determinism there, and then you were taking some concepts from one particular theory. Eventually, as the work evolves and you're doing something as in depth as the PhD, you would definitely be pulling from different frameworks, okay? And then that's when you could create what you call a conceptual model or conceptual framework, okay?
Okay.
Makes sense? So at least you started, you know, sort of grappling with the issues. And, you know, the question about the theoretic frame, remember, it's to guide you in helping you to explain what you're finding, guide you in helping you to design the study, guide you in asking certain types of questions and so on. Okay.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that. That does clarify.
Yes. I
I
know Dr. Bravo is one member of our faculty who is quite interested in consumer behavior. I'm sure she will have some inputs for you, you know, some insights on how you could focus this study, okay? I think it's a necessary study, but you know, this being your first presentation, I know you would probably go through some revisions to get it to that final solid study to really tie down the whole notion of consumer behavior in relation to corporate social responsibility. Consider also, which is where I think some of the questioning was going, is the study even richer by looking at a broader level of the link between corporate social responsibility and consumer behavior without naming a sector, if you get what I'm saying.
Okay.
Without naming a sector. So there's that approach too, where you could just be talking to customers to see how consumers, you know, once you consume certain products, how do people recognize the corporate social responsibility efforts of a range of companies, okay? But you are now trying to be focused by saying, I'm trying to figure out from customers, well, banking customers, how do they recognize, you know, how do they perceive the corporate social responsibility of the banking sector, all right? Which, nothing wrong with that. It's just that I'm keeping you flexible at this stage to say you might review the literature and go down a particular path. You probably may come back to us and choose another sector, but again, your own justifications of the sector you're using is going to be necessary, I would say, all right?
Okay.
All right, thanks for that. Any final questions? I'm looking down the chat. We have a number, okay. Something else from any of our MPhil candidates. I see Kimiko, Reina, Richardo, Tashia. Okay. So thanks for that. Thank you so much then, Cedella McKie. Congratulations again on starting this process. We see where you have your work cut out for you, clearly, and you're going to be on the path now to preparing your proposal for ethical review. So I think this feedback is already giving you some thoughts, and we realize that you're still shaping up the research and the study design yourself, all right? But thanks again for that. For next week, we're going to be hearing Richardo. Richardo is here. Richardo Aiken volunteered that he will be able to share some information on creative industry grants for micro, small, and medium enterprise development. Yes,
Right.
Richardo. So we're looking forward to that presentation next week. It's the creative industry grants, yes?
Right.
From the CDB, the Caribbean Development Bank. So next week, we're going to be hearing how we can be accessing funding out of a grant program from the Caribbean Development.
Actually, the person in charge of that department will be presenting.
Yes.
So they will join on
at 3. Okay, great.
Right.
Thank you for that. I see some
problem.
questions. Gail is asking, we need a research question to apply for an MPhil. Not a research question, but a research proposal. Brianne Gale. Okay. Thanks again. Okay, guys, it is now 4 o'clock. Quite a productive 1 hour. Thanks to Cedella for presenting this afternoon, and thanks to you all for showing up. Thanks to the team of students, Dr. Obika and his final year students in COM 3199 who are also helping out with the organization and promotion of this seminar. We continue to look forward to greater things and more research from all of you. So see you again next week, Wednesday, when we'll do this again and hear more about the grant program from the Caribbean Development Bank. Thanks again, everybody. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.